So it all ends here. Powers of X #6. And given it's Jonathan Hickman, it's got a happy Disney-like ending, right? That, well, hey, this is Perch. What a run this has been. And I'm going to do another video on the whole series, just kind of laying it all out in front of me and pointing out the different clues and different steps and everything that took. But this is about Powers of X #6. This is the final issue in the 12-issue prologue to Dawn of X, which sounds like a lot of X things in there. But this was basically Jonathan Hickman coming in and turning the whole X universe on its ear and really setting up kind of the new future of the X-Men, of which we're promised that Hickman's going to be around, deeply involved for at least 2-3 years, hopefully longer than that. The response to this has been absolutely incredible. So Marvel would have to be insane to let him get away at this point, and should really be looking at how he architects bigger things. I mean, and I'll reference a lot of his Avengers run during the course of this review, but it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. He architected a pretty smart, pretty all-encompassing Avengers run that if you had one complaint about it, it's that it didn't reach far enough into other books. Other books chose to ignore it and were able to ignore it. And that set up, some bad stuff in the book. And it just, it didn't allow that title and Avengers and ultimately Secret Wars to go as far as it did, because several titles, just as soon as it ended, just kind of went on about their business with a brand new #1 issue and didn't really take advantage of the toys that Hickman put into the toy box. So what better way to start Powers of X #6 with a quote from Professor X, "And now we build." And so, again, very nice art from Jonathan Hickman, R.B. Silva, who does the majority of the work. We do borrow some panels from Pepe Larraz in previous books just to tie everything nicely together. We lead off with a very happy, very content walking Charles Xavier. And this is an Xavier kind of in the past who is content to kind of wander the world, and he encounters for the first time Moira. And we've seen this scene before, but now we're seeing truly the full scene. We're not just seeing clips of it. So after a brief little chat, we get into kind of Moira reading the tarot cards and really identifying things from a particular life of hers, the previous life, the life where with Apocalypse, she helped the X-Men score a pretty critical bit of information. And it's worth noting at this point that we've seen of several of her lives referenced. We've seen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And I've said all along that we have most likely seen life #6. It's just being hidden from us for a particular reason. And now we know kind of exactly what that reason is. And so here we are, she and Xavier having their chat. And for the first time, she lets Xavier read her mind and realize her past lives. And this scene kind of came out, and I remember saying at the time, this is a big data dump. This is a lot of information that suddenly gets thrown at Charles here. And that is that's not likely to be as calm as that one panel where he sees who she is and kind of what's going on. There's likely more behind it, and now we see why. But before we get there, we get a skip ahead to year 1000, and we finally identify what this kind of zoo, as I was calling it, was. It's the Preserve, and it truly is a zoo. It's kind of an ark of sorts that the librarian and other people here in the future look down on. They've kind of captured things. And so there's been these shadowy creatures that we've assumed are man that were the previous leg of the evolutionary ladder. And so as the librarian kind of calls some of the people to, we see that there are other creatures, other things, but they look more abnormal, more mutated. And thus we learn, as we see Wolverine, Logan is part of the zoo. And the realization here is that these are humans. The blue-skinned, kind of modified creatures are humans to an evolved form of a human, and that the creatures in the zoo are the mutants. And what this all basically means, as Moira also enters the picture, is that they lose. That despite their thoughts that humanity was the previous leg of the evolutionary ladder and mutants were the natural ascendants, that humanity, in effect, wins. And the librarian, with some sadness, notes that they're about to ascend, be part of the collective known as the Phalanx, Phalanx, depending on how you pronounce it. My somebody pointed out my way of describing things was broken some time ago by having some other languages go on. But anyway, as the librarian reveals that the world's ending tomorrow, that they're going to ascend and be part of the global consciousness, that they need to arrange to send Moira off planet. And why? Well, because if she dies, then it resets. The timeline resets, and then they don't get to ascend. So it's not necessarily an act of mercy. It's the fact that basically her death will kind of wreck this 1,000-year-old plan. There's still a question of why, how is Moira alive here? But you can assume, through the cloning bats and other things. But basically, the librarian is saying, you've thought that you were going to beat us. You thought that mutants would evolve and take from us, but in the end, humanity won. Humanity basically evolved, not necessarily the mutants. The mutants were an aberration, a side line. And that humans, and they're not, they've consistently referenced their post-human eyes, that they've evolved up. That, and they dub a new term, this Homo novissima, the end of the evolutionary lane, the last man there ever will be. So this is humanity's last stop, because they're about to merge with the collective tech consciousness of the Phalanx. But is noting that, you never saw this coming. The mutants always assumed they were next. But they were not. They're in a cage. What's inevitable is that they will die or be trapped or caged. As he says, it's inevitable that you're inside the cage, not out of it. That mutants were an evolutionary response. And this is the big idea that Hickman's playing here, because it's been a kind of a close-up card trick that we've been seeing, and that is that we've assumed, we've been being told that mutants were the next evolutionary line, and humans, desperate to kind of keep their state and fight for their own survival, would work to knock them out. But the opposite. It's well, not exactly the opposite. The humans are fighters, and the mutants are not. And when humanity stops being beholden to its environment, when it embraces technology and some of these other aspects of evolution, that environment is no longer a factor, and mutants suddenly fall down the evolutionary chart, not up. And so, what good was one mutant adapting to its environment when they could just make 10 supermen? You thought it was the machines that would defeat you, but the machines were just used to buy time. And that this is all the end. And I'll come back to this in a second, but basically, this is Hickman really exploring the ideas around evolution and what it means to evolve, and that it's not just natural evolution. If you go back and look through the last 11 issues or so, you see lots of examples of this message being conveyed. Nimrod's brought us decades, that this is how it ends for mutants, that they are going to be basically get clipped off the evolutionary ladder because they're a reaction to environment, where humans have evolved past their environment. And now humans are about to become a small part of their god. Well, as the monologue is continuing, Logan kind of is able to sneak up and murder the librarian, and it has a great line: "Dear Lord, up in robot heaven, tell me, was that fast enough for you?" That is very nice. Anyway, so Moira is going to do something about it, and she asks Logan to send her on her way. And Logan, for a second time, because he's done it before, ends Moira's life. And thus we see how the sixth life has ended, which means the year 1000 branch and a few things in between were in fact the sixth life, which a couple of people called, including me, that area, that timeline through either color or style or other things was in fact the sixth timeline, and this was the one that basically radicalized Moira in a true way. So Charles reading all this through his mind basically is broken. It cuts at everything he's believed, his entire core, his system of understanding, and he knows that not only do they lose, they always lose. And Charles kind of goes to his old mechanisms of, well, maybe if I get better students and I make a better appeal to our allies and everything else. And Moira convinces him, you have, this is not going to work. But you're a good man who believes in the goodness of others, but that's not true. The goodness of others is not something you can rely on. And this touches upon a theme he used again with the Avengers in Time Runs Out, where you saw, in this case, the human team, Namor, Black Panther, Tony Stark, Reed Richards, and others, basically make the choice of, do they go out to other realities and kill Earths in order to kind of save their own? And they wrestle with that concept of what does it mean to survive? What steps would you take? And this is again reflected here of what makes a good person or a bad person. What's today's challenge versus the greater good and the problems of tomorrow. So Moira basically wakes Charles up. We see a few lines of her journal talking about kind of the pain of him being kind of broken. And we get some different entries. The entries at times are scrubbed. We see several skipped, and we talk about recruiting Magneto. We see through this Charles coming to accept what has happened, but still going about his own way. And if you go back to the timelines from Moira and what happened after the sixth timeline, the first thing she does is she receives military training, and she attempts on her own to kill the Trasks and basically stave off the Sentinel program. And in the next timeline, she goes for Magneto, and she tries to kind of violently, take control. And in the eighth timeline, in the ninth timeline, she wakes Apocalypse and continues there in the Apocalypse War, and that's the scenes we've seen there, where she and other mutants are basically Apocalypse clones. There, Apocalypse enslaved Sinister, and there is where a lot of Moira's misgivings about Sinister and how he should be handled really come into play. And we'll again hit that in a minute. And finally, we're Life 10, and this is basically our House of X, Dawn of X timeline, where we've seen Moira and Xavier. Not everything fits here, so there's probably a few more moments that need to come in terms of where how this all played out, and what would really be helpful, I doubt they will do it, is a few comics that reference the last 200 issues, the last 15 years, 20 years or so of X-Men, and how some of these moments play out. And I hope they do that. But anyway, in her journal, we see that they're talking about recruiting Xavier. They're talking about her definite misgivings. There's there's a couple entries blacked out. The question is, who blacked these out? Was it Moira herself or somebody else? We see some of the warnings and threats about Sinister. We see that Charles and Magneto have recruited Sinister to their cause. And the line, "What is this thing that men do, where they think they can shape the world to their liking and bend others to whatever they will? This is folly. And if what they told me is true regarding their meeting with him, he has produced his first chimera decades early, and it is Sinister himself." So this is the threat. And then they talk about losing Magneto and kind of the timeline we know about. Which then finally brings us to the current timeline, or yesterday, where we see a little bit more of that meeting with Charles and Magneto. And there was always this feeling that the Charles under the helmet, if you will, was not truly Charles. And that was the trick. A lot of us, including myself, fell for it. He's being controlled, or it was a kind of sinister Charles under there. Some people said the Maker. Obviously, that was never going to be the case, but. Basically, you see how the interaction has gone with Magneto and Charles and Moira. And you see kind of the new dynamic of all of them. And you see that Moira, who has all this knowledge, has all these has all this insight, has basically Charles and Magneto are now very confident in their plan moving forward, and they're almost kind of not putting Moira on the back burner, but they're very confident in what they do. And so this is I'm positive a theme of the next 2 years will be kind of the arrogance of both Charles and Magneto believing in what they have and what they're doing, but ultimately failing. So they go over kind of the plan. We get another pretty big bit of information here, basically that Mystique is joining, but wants to bring Destiny back, and they promise that they will. And Moira is saying you cannot bring her back. There cannot be precogs on Krakoa. We cannot have mutants who see the future because they will understand Moira's her weakness and her death and what that means. And if we bring her back, she tells everyone as she sees, then it will wreck. What if she tells everyone the truth? Because the truth has not been revealed. Like the Illuminati, again, in the Avengers line, these are great men keeping secrets. And here we see more secrets being kept, in this case, between each other. We also see that, she still has misgivings about Sinister. They've put Sinister on the council, so the two of them have already started to go their own way and do their own thing. They deserve to know the truth one day. Whereas, the truth is we always lose. And once again, there's supreme confidence in these two. They go see the celebration. We get another shot, which is going to be an important one, of Apocalypse kind of sitting on his own. His initial war is over, but he's uneasy. Apocalypse senses the truth, and we see basically here is this new world that they've created, and it's hopeful, but it's also it's not sinister. Well, sinister there too, but it's also powerful. Charles saying, if they're going to try and stop us, let them try. Charles and Magneto are aligned. It is humans who are wary and for all intents and purposes against mutants. That's a big deal. It's a big change in Charles's philosophy, big change for the X-Men and kind of the missions they're on. So what does all this mean? Well, this launches right into Dawn of X, and we have these titles. They all make a lot more sense now. I think Cyclops leading different teams and X-Men will be going out to do the missions that need to be done in this new world. Marauders, obviously connected to the Hellfire Trading Company and what they're doing. Excalibur is about expansion. It's about looking for other ways to escape this threat of humans and see how magic can be harnessed. It makes sense that Apocalypse is there as a key conqueror of some of these other areas. X-Force, it's self-descriptive. It's both the science and the ops of looking for these threats. It's really kind of aligned with that mission to the sun, where they stop the master mold. What other things are out there? What other problems are there that need to be solved in order to ensure survival? New Mutants is about bringing the New Mutants to Krakoa and growing the overall kind of mutant community and what's there. And Fallen Angels are about characters who are living in this peacetime, but or at least somewhat aware that there's a problem here. There is a threat. I predicted this threat of, they know something is wrong. Well, the wrong in this case is they know that the premise of this world is built somewhat on a lie, that there are big dangers here, that the humans, that the mutants always lose. And this is not the first time this has been tried. So, a powerful issue. I think it was a good wrap up. It's a downer of a wrap up for sure. This is setting the stage for more battles to come. I said the other shoe would drop. The shoe dropped, but it's really kind of it sets up a very shadowy future. And some people criticize this issue of being too talky, and I've heard some reviews of like Hickman just blah, 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 blah concept, and where them fights. And I think that, this comic is going to appeal to some people. Its universe will appeal to some people, and some people it won't. It definitely, I think, if you're a longtime X-Men fan, it keeps you interested to keep going. You're probably rankling a little bit at some of the changes that have been made to the characters and Charles and others. But this is in line with that bigger kind of, threat. And where the X-Men have always been good is when their backs are up against the wall and they're fighting this kind of insurmountable threat of extinction or people that fear and hate them. And we have that here. We know that that's the future. Again, that this isn't utopia. It's a staging ground, and it's a mission for survival. So what does all that mean? It also means we got some big threats. We know about Sinister. We now have this Mystique and Destiny angle. We know about the Phalanx itself. At what point will the mutants, need to potentially go and try and address that threat head on? How are the humans going to respond? We've already seen in some cases that, they're going to try and do these programs. They're going to put these into place. And what does this mean for characters like the Avengers and the Fantastic Four and others? How does that fit into all this? So it's a very intriguing moment. I think this has revitalized the X-Men line for sure. And the question is, how do the other titles respond? If Marvel is smart, they get an architect in to work on Avengers, and they start building that up as well. And you have an absolutely amazing event at some point when these two things collide. I think that will sell. To Sobolski's comment, that's what sells 1 million copies. But I thought a great issue, a great run. Like I said, I'm going to do a full recap of everything here later, but can't be more happy with. I could always be more happy, but I'm pleased. This is a good ending, thought provoking, a lot of interesting stuff going on. So you can't complain about that. What did you think? Leave me a comment below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, tell a friend, follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, and thank you for listening.